There comes a moment in every human life when the noise of the world grows so loud that we can no longer hear the whispers of our own soul. Perhaps you have found yourself here tonight because sleep has become elusive, or because the darkness offers a sanctuary where truth can finally speak without the harsh judgment of daylight. If so, then know this: we do not gather merely to chase rest or to fill the silence with pleasant sounds. We are here to descend into the deeper chambers of consciousness, where the most profound psychological truths wait to be discovered. When I speak of psychological truth, I do not speak of the sanitized wisdom found in self-help books or the comfortable platitudes that society offers to soothe our restless minds. No, I speak of the raw, unfiltered revelations that emerge when we strip away the personas we wear and confront what lies beneath. These are the truths that make us uncomfortable, that challenge our carefully constructed narratives about who we are and why we behave as we do. The human psyche is not a simple machine to be understood through logic alone. It is a vast ocean with depths we have barely begun to explore. In the darkness of night, when our defenses are lowered and our conscious mind begins to retreat, we become more permeable to the currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. This is when the most authentic aspects of ourselves begin to emerge, when the masks we wear in daylight slip away and reveal the face we rarely dare to examine. Consider for a moment how differently you think when you are alone in the dark compared to how you present yourself in the bright light of social interaction. In darkness, thoughts arise that you would never speak aloud. Feelings surface that you have spent years trying to suppress. This is not madness or weakness. This is the natural rhythm of the psyche, seeking balance, seeking wholeness, seeking truth. The first psychological truth I offer you tonight is this: you are not who you think you are. The identity you carry through your daily life, the story you tell yourself about your motivations and desires, is but a fraction of your total being. Like an iceberg, the vast majority of who you are remains hidden beneath the surface of consciousness. Your thoughts, your reactions, your deepest longings and fears, all of these are influenced by forces you cannot see, patterns you have never examined, and wounds you may not even remember receiving. This hidden self is not your enemy, though it may sometimes feel that way. When you find yourself reacting with unexpected anger, when you feel drawn to people who are clearly wrong for you, when you sabotage your own success just as victory seems within reach, these are not random occurrences. They are the hidden self attempting to communicate, to be seen, to be integrated into the wholeness of who you are. But society has taught us to fear this hidden self. We are told to be consistent, to be predictable, to present a polished version of ourselves to the world. We learn to suppress the parts of us that do not fit the acceptable mold. We bury our rage, our grief, our wild creativity, our primal instincts. We exile the aspects of ourselves that make others uncomfortable, and in doing so, we exile parts of our own soul. This brings us to the second psychological truth: what you resist persists, and what you deny grows stronger in the shadows. The emotions you refuse to feel do not disappear. They go underground, where they gather power and influence your life in ways you cannot consciously control. The aspects of yourself you find most unacceptable do not vanish when ignored. They find other ways to express themselves, often through the very behaviors you are trying to avoid. I have worked with individuals who spent decades trying to eliminate their anger, only to find themselves surrounded by angry people who seem to appear from nowhere. I have seen those who rejected their own vulnerability attract partners who demanded constant emotional support. The psyche has its own intelligence, its own way of seeking balance, and it will use whatever means necessary to bring the rejected parts of ourselves back into awareness. This is not a flaw in human design, it is a feature. The psyche's relentless drive toward wholeness is what makes healing and growth possible. But it requires us to develop the courage to face what we have been avoiding, to feel what we have been afraid to feel, to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we have deemed unacceptable. The third psychological truth flows naturally from this understanding. Your greatest strengths and your deepest wounds often share the same source. The sensitivity that allows you to create beautiful art may also make you vulnerable to emotional overwhelm. The drive that propels you to achieve great things may also make it impossible for you to rest. The compassion that draws others to you for healing may also attract those who seek to drain your energy. This is not a cruel joke played by the universe. It is the natural consequence of being a complex, multifaceted being. Every gift carries a shadow, every strength has a corresponding vulnerability. The key is not to eliminate one side of this equation, but to learn to dance with both, to find the balance that allows your gifts to flourish without being consumed by their shadows. Many people spend their lives trying to become someone other than who they are, believing that if they could just fix their flaws or eliminate their struggles, they would finally be happy. But this approach is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are whole and in need of integration. The fourth psychological truth addresses one of the most persistent sources of human suffering: the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences. Every event in your life is filtered through the lens of interpretation. Two people can experience the exact same situation and create entirely different meanings from it. One person's devastating failure becomes another person's valuable learning experience. One person's rejection becomes evidence of their unworthiness, while another sees it as protection from an incompatible relationship. These interpretations are not neutral observations, they are creative acts that shape your reality. The story you tell yourself about your childhood, your relationships, your failures and successes becomes the foundation upon which you build your identity and make your choices. But here is what most people never realize. You are the author of these stories, and you have the power to rewrite them. This does not mean denying difficult experiences or pretending that pain is pleasure. It means recognizing that between any event and your response to it lies a space of choice. The choice of how to interpret what has happened, what it means about you, and what possibilities it opens or closes for your future. The fifth psychological truth ventures into territory that many find uncomfortable. You are responsible for your own experience of life, but this responsibility is not the same as blame. There is a vast difference between acknowledging your role in creating your reality and punishing yourself for not having done better. Responsibility is empowering. It suggests that if you played a role in creating your current situation, you also have the power to change it. Blame is paralyzing. It traps you in shame and prevents the very growth that could lead to transformation. This distinction is crucial because it addresses one of the most common ways people stay stuck in patterns that no longer serve them. They either take on too much responsibility believing that everything wrong in their life is their fault, or they take on too little, believing that they are victims of circumstances beyond their control. Both positions rob you of your power to create meaningful change. The truth is more nuanced. You are responsible for your responses, your choices, your interpretations, and your growth. You are not responsible for what others do, for the circumstances you were born into, or for the actions of those who hurt you before you had the awareness to protect yourself. Learning to distinguish between what is yours to own and what belongs to others is one of the most liberating skills you can develop. As we settle deeper into this exploration, I want you to notice what is happening in your body as you listen to these words. Are there places where you feel tension or resistance? Are there truths that make you want to look away or distract yourself? This is valuable information. Your body holds wisdom that your mind has not yet accessed. It remembers experiences your conscious awareness has forgotten. It knows truths your intellect is not ready to acknowledge. The relationship between mind and body is far more intimate than most people realize. Every thought creates a physical response. Every emotion leaves its mark in your cellular memory. Trauma is not just a psychological phenomenon, it is a whole being experience that affects how you breathe, how you move, how you hold yourself in space. Healing, therefore, cannot be purely mental. It must include the body's wisdom and the body's needs. This brings us to the sixth psychological truth. Healing is not a destination, but a way of traveling through life. There is no point at which you will be completely healed, perfectly balanced, or free from all challenges. The goal is not to eliminate struggle, but to develop a more conscious, compassionate relationship with it. To learn to move through difficulties with greater awareness, to recover more quickly from setbacks, to find meaning and growth in the midst of pain. This understanding can be both liberating and disappointing. Liberating because it removes the pressure to achieve some perfect state of mental health. Disappointing because it means the work is never finished. But this ongoing nature of psychological growth is actually one of its greatest gifts. It means you are always capable of change, always able to learn something new about yourself, always in possession of the potential for transformation. The seventh truth addresses a fundamental aspect of human nature that few are willing to acknowledge. You contain within yourself the capacity for both great love and great cruelty, for both profound wisdom and stunning ignorance, for both selfless service and selfish destruction. This is not a moral failing, it is the human condition. To deny the darker aspects of your nature is to remain unconscious of them, and what remains unconscious tends to act itself out in unconscious ways. The person who insists they could never hurt anyone often hurts others through neglect or passive aggression. The one who prides themselves on their rationality may be driven by emotions they refuse to acknowledge. The individual who sees themselves as purely good may project their disowned darkness onto others, becoming judgmental and self-righteous. Integration requires honest self-examination. It requires the courage to look at the parts of yourself you find most disturbing and to ask not how to eliminate them, but how to understand them, how to work with them consciously rather than being driven by them unconsciously. This is shadow work in its purest form, not the romanticized version that has become popular in certain circles, but the real, messy, uncomfortable work of becoming whole. It is the process of reclaiming the exiled parts of yourself and learning to channel their energy in constructive rather than destructive ways. Your anger, properly understood and directed, becomes the energy needed to establish boundaries and fight for what matters. Your selfishness, consciously owned, becomes healthy self-care and the ability to say no when necessary. Your darkness, integrated rather than denied, becomes depth, authenticity, and the capacity to meet others in their struggles without judgment. As we continue this journey through the night, remember that these truths are not meant to be grasped by the intellect alone, but felt, experienced, allowed to settle into the deeper layers of your being where real transformation occurs. The eighth psychological truth emerges from the realm of relationships, where the most profound mirrors of our inner world reveal themselves. Every person who enters your life, whether for a moment or a lifetime, carries within them a reflection of something that exists within you. This is not mystical thinking, but psychological reality. We are drawn to others not by accident, but by the unconscious recognition of familiar patterns, unresolved conflicts, and unlived aspects of ourselves. The people who trigger your strongest reactions, both positive and negative, are often your greatest teachers. They show you what you have not yet integrated, what you are still healing, what you are ready to learn. The individual who enrages you with their selfishness may be reflecting your own disowned need for self-care. The person whose confidence intimidates you may be showing you the power you have not yet claimed. The one whose neediness exhausts you may be mirroring the parts of yourself that still hunger for attention and validation. But here is where most people misunderstand this dynamic. They believe that recognizing these reflections means everyone else is simply a projection of their inner world, that others have no independent reality or agency. This is not the case. Others are fully autonomous beings with their own complexities and motivations. The reflection principle does not diminish their individuality. It reveals why certain people impact you so powerfully while others barely register on your emotional radar. Understanding this principle transforms how you navigate relationships. Instead of trying to change others or escape from those who challenge you, you begin to ask different questions. What is this person showing me about myself? What unhealed part of me is being activated? What growth is being demanded of me in this interaction? This shift from external blame to internal inquiry is one of the most powerful tools for psychological development. The ninth truth delves into the nature of time and how it operates within the psyche. Linear time, past, present, future, is a construct that serves the conscious mind but does not reflect the deeper reality of psychological experience. In the unconscious, all time exists simultaneously. Past wounds live in present moment reactions. Future fears shape current decisions. Childhood experiences continue to influence adult behavior as if they happened yesterday. This is why traditional approaches to healing that focus solely on present moment awareness or future goal setting often fall short. They ignore the fact that the past is not past, it is alive and active in every moment, shaping perception, triggering reactions, and limiting possibilities. True healing requires entering into dialogue with these temporal layers, understanding how they interact and influence each other. Memory is not a filing system where experiences are stored unchanged. It is a living, dynamic process that recreates the past each time it is accessed. This means that healing the past is always possible because the past exists only in present moment memory. When you change your relationship to a memory, when you find new meaning in old experiences or integrate previously overwhelming emotions, you literally change the past's influence on your present. This understanding offers tremendous hope for those who feel trapped by their history. You are not condemned to repeat old patterns forever. The traumatic experiences that shaped you in childhood do not have to define you in adulthood. But this freedom requires conscious engagement with the past, not denial or suppression of it. The 10th psychological truth addresses the paradoxical nature of control. The more desperately you try to control your inner experience, your thoughts, emotions, reactions, the more chaotic it becomes. The more tightly you grip your external circumstances, your relationships, career, environment, the more likely they are to slip through your fingers. This is not perversity on the part of life, it is the natural response of living systems to excessive control. Control is an illusion that the ego maintains to feel safe in an uncertain world. But this illusion comes at a tremendous cost. It prevents you from responding fluidly to changing circumstances. It blocks the natural flow of emotion that allows for processing and integration. It creates rigid patterns that make adaptation and growth nearly impossible. The alternative to control is not chaos but conscious participation. Instead of trying to dictate how life unfolds, you learn to dance with its rhythms. Instead of suppressing unwanted emotions, you develop the capacity to feel them fully and let them move through you. Instead of forcing outcomes, you align your actions with your deepest values and trust the process of natural unfolding. This requires developing what might be called psychological flexibility, the ability to hold your plans lightly, to adapt to unexpected circumstances, to remain open to possibilities you had not considered. It means learning to distinguish between what is truly within your influence and what lies beyond it, and focusing your energy accordingly. The 11th truth explores the relationship between suffering and meaning. Suffering is an inevitable part of human existence, but meaningless suffering is one of the most destructive forces the psyche can encounter. When pain has no purpose, when struggle leads nowhere, when loss teaches nothing, the human spirit begins to wither. But when suffering is connected to growth, to love, to service, to the expansion of consciousness, it becomes bearable and even transformative. This does not mean that all suffering is necessary or that you should seek out pain for its own sake. It means that when suffering comes, as it inevitably will, your task is not to eliminate it as quickly as possible, but to mine it for its gifts, to ask what it is teaching you, how it is changing you, what new capacities it is developing within you. Viktor Frankl discovered in the concentration camps that those who could find meaning in their suffering were more likely to survive than those who could not. This principle applies to all forms of psychological pain. The depression that forces you to examine your life's direction, the anxiety that reveals your unacknowledged fears, the grief that opens your heart to deeper love. All of these can become allies in your development if you approach them with the right understanding. The 12th truth addresses the nature of authenticity, a word that has been diluted by popular culture but remains essential to psychological health. Authenticity is not about expressing every thought and feeling without filter. It is not about doing whatever you want regardless of consequences. True authenticity is about living in alignment with your deepest values and truest nature, even when, especially when, doing so requires sacrifice or courage. This alignment is not a destination, but a daily practice. It requires constant checking in with yourself, asking whether your actions match your values, whether your words reflect your truth, whether your choices serve your highest good and the good of others. It means being willing to disappoint people when their expectations conflict with your integrity. Authenticity also requires self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is not a comfortable process. It means facing aspects of yourself you would prefer to ignore. It means acknowledging contradictions, hypocrisies, and blind spots. It means accepting that you are neither as good as your best moments nor as bad as your worst ones, but something far more complex and interesting than either extreme. The 13th psychological truth concerns the nature of change itself. Most people approach change as if it were a linear process. Identify what needs to be different, make a plan, execute the plan, achieve the desired result. But psychological change rarely follows this neat progression. It is more like a spiral, where you seem to circle back to the same issues repeatedly, each time at a deeper level of understanding and integration. This spiral nature of growth means that setbacks are not failures but natural parts of the process. The depression that returns after months of feeling better, the old patterns that resurface under stress, the familiar reactions that emerge in new relationships, these are not signs that you have not grown, but indications that you are ready to work with these patterns at a deeper level. Real change happens in layers. The first layer might be intellectual understanding, recognizing a pattern and its origins. The second layer might be emotional integration, feeling the pain that created the pattern and allowing it to move through you. The third layer might be behavioral, making different choices even when the old impulses arise. The fourth layer might be energetic, embodying the change so completely that the old pattern no longer has any charge or pull. This process cannot be rushed and it cannot be controlled. It unfolds according to its own intelligence, which is often wiser than the conscious mind's timeline. Patience with this process is not passivity, but active trust in the psyche's natural healing capacity. The 14th truth addresses the relationship between solitude and connection. Human beings are inherently social creatures, but many people have lost the ability to be alone with themselves without distraction. They fill every moment with activity, entertainment, or interaction, afraid of what they might discover in the silence. This fear of solitude is actually a fear of intimacy. Intimacy with yourself. True connection with others is impossible without first establishing connection with yourself. If you do not know your own depths, you cannot share them with another. If you have not learned to comfort yourself in distress, you will desperately seek that comfort from others, creating relationships based on need rather than choice. Solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is the pleasure of being connected to yourself. It is in solitude that you hear the whispers of intuition, that you process the experiences of daily life, that you commune with the deeper aspects of your nature. Regular solitude is not a luxury, but a necessity for psychological health. It allows the nervous system to reset, the mind to integrate experiences, and the soul to remember its own rhythm. Without this regular return to yourself, you become lost in the expectations and energies of others, forgetting who you are beneath all the roles you play. As we move deeper into this exploration, notice how your breathing has changed, how your body has settled into a different rhythm. The truths we are exploring are not merely intellectual concepts, but living realities that your entire being recognizes at some level. Allow yourself to receive them not just with your mind, but with your whole self. Human consciousness is far more vast and mysterious than our culture acknowledges. We have been conditioned to believe that the rational thinking mind is the totality of who we are, but this is like mistaking the tip of an iceberg for the entire structure. Beneath the surface of ordinary awareness lie depths of wisdom, creativity, and knowing that most people never access because they have never learned how to dive below the waves of surface thought. These deeper levels of consciousness communicate through dreams, through intuition, through the body's sensations, through synchronicities and symbols that appear in daily life. They speak a language that is more poetic than logical, more felt than thought, more symbolic than literal. Learning to understand this language is like recovering a lost native tongue, reconnecting with a part of yourself that has always been there but has been overshadowed by the noise of modern life. The 15th psychological truth reveals something that will challenge everything you have been taught about emotions. You have been conditioned to believe that emotions are inconvenient disruptions to rational thought, temporary states to be managed or eliminated as quickly as possible. But emotions are not the enemy of clarity, they are messengers carrying information that your rational mind cannot access through logic alone. Each emotion is a sophisticated guidance system, evolved over millions of years to help you navigate the complexities of existence. Fear alerts you to potential danger, not just physical but psychological and spiritual. Anger signals that a boundary has been crossed or a value has been violated. Sadness marks the depth of what mattered to you, honoring what has been lost. Joy celebrates alignment with your deepest nature and values. But here is what makes this truth so difficult to accept. Emotions must be felt fully to deliver their message. You cannot think your way through grief or rationalize yourself out of anxiety. The information they carry is unlocked only through direct experience, through allowing the energy of the emotion to move through your system completely. This is why so many people feel emotionally numb or confused. They have spent years interrupting the natural flow of emotion before it could complete its cycle. They distract themselves at the first sign of discomfort, medicate the pain before it can speak, or analyze their feelings instead of experiencing them. This leaves them cut off from one of their most sophisticated guidance systems. The 16th truth addresses a phenomenon that every human being encounters but few understand: projection. You do not see the world as it is, you see it as you are. Your perceptions are filtered through the lens of your experiences, your beliefs, your unhealed wounds, and your unlived dreams. What you notice, what you ignore, what triggers you, what inspires you, all of these are shaped by the internal landscape you carry within you. This means that your reactions to others tell you more about yourself than they do about them. The person who seems arrogant may be triggering your own insecurity about your worth. The individual who appears weak might be reflecting your own disowned vulnerability. The one who seems too emotional could be mirroring your own suppressed feelings. But projection is not just about negative reactions. You also project your positive qualities onto others, often seeing in them capacities that exist within you but remain undeveloped. The person you admire for their creativity may be showing you your own untapped artistic potential. The individual whose confidence you envy might be reflecting your own inner strength that has not yet found expression. Understanding projection transforms how you navigate the world. Instead of being at the mercy of your reactions, you begin to use them as a map of your inner territory. Every strong response becomes an invitation to explore what within you is being activated, what is asking for attention, what is ready to be integrated or healed. The 17th psychological truth ventures into territory that makes many uncomfortable: the relationship between consciousness and death. Death is not merely a biological event that happens at the end of life. It is a psychological process that occurs continuously. Parts of you are dying all the time. Old identities, outdated beliefs, relationships that no longer serve, versions of yourself that you have outgrown. This ongoing death is not tragedy, but necessity. Without the death of what no longer serves, growth becomes impossible. The caterpillar must dissolve completely before the butterfly can emerge. Your childhood self had to die for your adult self to be born. Your unconscious patterns must die for conscious choice to become possible. Yet most people resist these necessary deaths with tremendous force. They cling to familiar identities, even when those identities cause suffering. They maintain relationships that drain their energy because the unknown feels more threatening than known misery. They repeat self-destructive patterns because those patterns feel like home, even when home is painful. Learning to die consciously, to let go of what needs to be released, is one of the most essential skills for psychological health. It requires developing the capacity to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing who you will become when you release who you have been. It means trusting that something new and more authentic can emerge from the space left by what has been surrendered. The 18th truth explores the nature of trauma and its hidden gifts. Trauma is not just about what happened to you, it is about what did not happen that should have. It is not only the presence of harm, but the absence of protection, attunement, and unconditional love when you needed them most. This understanding expands the definition of trauma beyond dramatic events to include the subtler wounds of emotional neglect, misattunement, and conditional acceptance. But here is what most people do not realize about trauma. It is also an initiation. The psyche that has been wounded develops capacities that the untraumatized psyche may never discover. Sensitivity, empathy, intuition, creativity, resilience, depth. All of these can be forged in the fire of difficult experiences. This does not mean that trauma is good or necessary, but it means that what happened to you does not have to define you as damaged or broken. The healing of trauma is not about returning to some mythical state of innocence or pretending that painful experiences did not occur. It is about integrating those experiences in a way that allows their wisdom to serve your growth, while their pain no longer controls your choices. It is about transforming wounds into sources of strength and compassion. This process requires tremendous courage because it means feeling what you have spent years trying to avoid. But on the other side of that feeling lies a freedom that cannot be taken away, the freedom that comes from knowing you can survive anything because you have already survived the worst. The 19th psychological truth addresses the relationship between shame and authenticity. Shame is the feeling that there is something fundamentally wrong with who you are at your core. Unlike guilt, which says, "I did something bad," shame says, "I am something bad." This distinction is crucial because shame attacks the very foundation of self-worth, making it one of the most destructive emotions the human psyche can experience. Shame thrives in secrecy and isolation. It convinces you that if others really knew who you were, your thoughts, your struggles, your mistakes, they would reject you completely. So you learn to hide, to perform, to present only the acceptable aspects of yourself while keeping the rest locked away in internal exile. But shame is also a liar. The parts of yourself that you find most unacceptable are often the most human parts of you. Your struggles, your failures, your imperfections, these do not make you defective. They make you relatable. The person who has never struggled cannot offer comfort to those who do. The individual who has never failed cannot understand the courage it takes to try again. Healing shame requires the radical act of being seen in your wholeness, not just your strengths, but your struggles, not just your victories, but your vulnerabilities. It means finding safe relationships where you can practice revealing the parts of yourself you have kept hidden and discovering that you are still lovable, still worthy, still acceptable exactly as you are. The 20th truth reveals something profound about the nature of personal power. True power is not the ability to control others or circumstances. It is the capacity to remain centered in your own truth, regardless of what is happening around you. It is the strength to feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them, to see clearly without being blinded by reactivity, to respond rather than react. This power cannot be given to you by external achievements or taken from you by external losses. It is cultivated through the daily practice of choosing consciousness over unconsciousness, truth over convenience, growth over comfort. It is developed by facing your fears instead of avoiding them, by speaking your truth instead of saying what others want to hear, by honoring your needs instead of abandoning them for approval. Personal power also requires accepting responsibility for the energy you bring to every interaction. You cannot control how others behave, but you can control the presence you offer. You cannot determine outcomes, but you can influence them through the quality of your participation. You cannot eliminate all suffering from your life, but you can transform your relationship to it. The 21st psychological truth addresses the mystery of purpose and meaning. Many people torture themselves with questions about their life's purpose, as if there were some predetermined destiny they must discover and fulfill. But purpose is not something you find. It is something you create through the choices you make and the love you express. Your purpose is not a fixed destination, but a dynamic unfolding. It changes as you change, deepens as you mature, and expands as your capacity for love and service grows. The person you are at 20 cannot fully comprehend the purpose that will emerge for you at 40 or 60 or 80. This is not failure of vision, but the natural evolution of consciousness. Purpose is also not always grand or dramatic. It may be as simple as learning to love yourself unconditionally, as quiet as being present for your family, as subtle as bringing consciousness to your daily interactions. The size of your purpose matters less than the sincerity with which you engage it. What matters most is that you align your actions with your deepest values, that you contribute to the healing of the world in whatever way feels authentic to you, that you use your unique gifts in service of something larger than your personal desires. When you do this consistently, purpose stops being a question and becomes a lived reality. The 22nd truth explores the relationship between vulnerability and strength. You have been taught that vulnerability is weakness, that showing your tender places makes you a target for harm. But the opposite is true. Vulnerability is the birthplace of courage, creativity, and connection. It is the willingness to be seen in your imperfection, to risk rejection for the possibility of authentic relationship, to speak your truth even when your voice shakes. Those who cannot be vulnerable cannot truly connect with others because connection requires the willingness to be known. They may have many acquaintances but few friends, many interactions but little intimacy. They may appear strong on the surface but feel isolated and misunderstood at their core. Vulnerability is not about oversharing or having no boundaries. It is about selective authenticity, choosing carefully when, where, and with whom to reveal your deeper self. It is about taking calculated risks with your heart, offering your truth to those who have earned the right to receive it. The strength that comes from conscious vulnerability is different from the brittle strength of invulnerability. It is flexible rather than rigid, resilient rather than defensive, open rather than closed. It allows you to bend without breaking, to be touched without being destroyed, to love without guarantees. As these truths settle into the deeper layers of your consciousness, you may notice a strange paradox emerging. The more you understand about the complexity of human psychology, the more compassionate you become toward your own struggles and the struggles of others. The more you recognize the unconscious forces that drive behavior, the less you judge and the more you seek to understand. This is the ultimate gift of psychological wisdom. Not the elimination of problems, but the transformation of your relationship to them. Not the achievement of perfection, but the embrace of your perfectly imperfect humanity. Not the end of struggle, but the development of the capacity to struggle with greater awareness, grace, and purpose. The 23rd truth addresses the nature of forgiveness, which is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in human psychology. Forgiveness is not about excusing harmful behavior or pretending that wounds do not exist. It is not about reconciliation or maintaining relationships with those who continue to cause harm. True forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It binds you to the very experiences you want to be free from, keeping old wounds fresh and preventing new possibilities from emerging. When you hold on to resentment, you give the person who hurt you ongoing power over your emotional state. Forgiveness is a process, not a single act. It often begins with the decision to forgive, a choice to stop feeding the anger and begin the work of release. This decision may need to be made repeatedly as waves of hurt and anger resurface. Each time you choose forgiveness over resentment, you reclaim a piece of your power. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting or trusting again immediately. It means remembering without the emotional charge, learning from the experience without being defined by it, protecting yourself while remaining open to love. It is one of the most challenging but liberating practices available to human consciousness. The 24th psychological truth reveals something essential about the nature of healing. It is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning, trauma, and false beliefs. Your essential self, your true nature, is not damaged by what you have experienced. It may be obscured, forgotten, or defended against, but it remains whole and perfect at your core. This understanding changes everything about how you approach personal growth. Instead of trying to fix what is wrong with you, you begin to uncover what is right with you. Instead of acquiring new qualities, you start revealing the qualities that have always been present. Instead of becoming worthy, you recognize that you have always been worthy. This does not mean that healing is easy or that growth is unnecessary. It means that you are not starting from a place of deficiency, but from a place of wholeness temporarily forgotten. Every step toward healing is actually a step toward remembering. Every moment of growth, a reclaiming of what was always yours. The 25th psychological truth ventures into the realm of dreams and their profound connection to waking consciousness. Your dreams are not random neural firings or meaningless fragments of daily experience. They are the psyche's attempt to communicate with you in its native language, a language of symbols, metaphors, and emotional truths that transcend the limitations of rational thought. In dreams, your unconscious mind processes experiences that your conscious awareness cannot fully integrate during waking hours. It sorts through emotions, memories, and conflicts, weaving them into narratives that reveal deeper patterns and possibilities. The person who appears in your dream may represent an aspect of yourself you have not acknowledged. The landscape you traverse may mirror your internal emotional terrain. The scenarios you encounter may be rehearsals for challenges you will face or invitations to explore paths you have not considered. But dreams speak in paradox and contradiction, requiring a different kind of listening than the literal interpretation your rational mind prefers. The nightmare that terrifies you may be showing you a strength you did not know you possessed. The dream of flying may represent not escape from reality, but a new perspective on it. The recurring dream that haunts you may be your psyche's persistent attempt to draw your attention to something crucial that remains unresolved. Learning to dialogue with your dreams transforms them from mysterious intrusions into valuable allies. When you begin to pay attention to the images, emotions, and narratives that emerge in sleep, you gain access to wisdom that your waking mind alone cannot provide. This is not fortune-telling or mystical interpretation, but psychological archaeology, excavating the buried treasures of your own consciousness. The 26th truth addresses the relationship between creativity and madness, two forces that dance at the edges of ordinary consciousness. The creative impulse arises from the same depths that produce psychological disturbance, the realm where normal boundaries dissolve and new possibilities emerge. This is why so many artists, writers, and innovators throughout history have struggled with mental health challenges. They are not broken, they are permeable to currents that most people cannot access. Creativity requires a willingness to enter states of consciousness that feel chaotic, uncertain, and overwhelming. It demands that you surrender control and allow something larger than your personal will to move through you. This surrender can feel like madness to a mind accustomed to directing and managing experience. Yet it is precisely this willingness to lose yourself that allows something new to be born through you. The key is learning to dance with these forces rather than being consumed by them. This requires developing what might be called creative boundaries, the ability to open to inspiration while maintaining enough structure to channel it productively. It means knowing when to surrender to the flow and when to apply discipline, when to trust the process, and when to step back and integrate. Those who fear their own creative impulses often do so because they sense the power contained within them. They intuitively understand that true creativity is not safe or predictable, that it will change them in ways they cannot foresee. But this transformation is not destruction, it is evolution. The person who emerges from authentic creative expression is not diminished but expanded, not weakened but empowered. The 27th psychological truth explores the nature of intuition, that subtle knowing that arises without logical explanation. Intuition is not magical thinking or wishful fantasy, but a sophisticated information processing system that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. It synthesizes vast amounts of data, body language, environmental cues, emotional resonances, pattern recognition, into insights that feel like sudden knowing. Your intuition speaks through sensations, impulses, and quiet inner voices that are easily drowned out by the noise of rational analysis. It communicates through what feels right or wrong in your body, through inexplicable attractions and aversions, through the sudden knowing that arrives without explanation. Learning to distinguish between intuitive wisdom and emotional reactivity is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Intuition is not infallible, but it provides information that logic alone cannot access. It can sense the emotional undercurrents in relationships, detect opportunities that are not yet obvious, and recognize patterns that connect seemingly unrelated events. When combined with rational analysis, rather than replaced by it, intuitive insight becomes a powerful tool for navigation in an uncertain world. The challenge is learning to trust this subtle guidance in a culture that values only what can be measured and proven. This requires cultivating the courage to act on inner knowing, even when you cannot explain or justify it to others. It means developing sensitivity to the difference between fear-based reactions and genuine intuitive guidance. The 28th truth addresses the paradox of seeking happiness. The more directly you pursue happiness, the more elusive it becomes. This is because happiness is not a destination to reach, but a byproduct of alignment. Alignment with your values, your purpose, your authentic nature. When you chase happiness as an end in itself, you create a relationship of neediness with your own experience that actually prevents the very state you seek. True contentment arises not from getting what you want, but from wanting what you have. It emerges not from eliminating all problems, but from finding meaning in your struggles. It comes not from perfect circumstances, but from perfect acceptance of imperfect circumstances. This acceptance is not passive resignation, but active engagement with reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. The pursuit of happiness often becomes a subtle form of self-rejection. The belief that you will be acceptable to yourself only when you feel a certain way. But happiness that depends on external conditions is fragile and temporary. The deeper satisfaction that comes from inner alignment is resilient and sustainable, because it does not depend on circumstances beyond your control. This does not mean that you should not work to improve your life or pursue goals that matter to you. It means approaching these pursuits from a place of wholeness rather than deficiency, creating from abundance rather than lack, choosing growth over the promise of future happiness. The 29th psychological truth ventures into the territory of death anxiety, the existential fear that underlies much of human psychological suffering. The awareness of mortality, your own and that of everyone you love, creates a fundamental anxiety that most people spend their lives trying to avoid. This avoidance takes many forms: the pursuit of immortality through achievement, the creation of meaning systems that promise eternal existence, the denial of aging and decay. But death anxiety is not just about physical death. It encompasses all forms of endings, losses, and transitions. The fear of relationship ending, career failure, loss of identity, or the passage of time all tap into this deeper terror of annihilation. This fear often drives compulsive behaviors, desperate attempts to control outcomes, and the inability to be present in the moment. Paradoxically, facing death anxiety directly can be liberating. When you truly accept the temporary nature of existence, priorities become clearer. What matters and what does not becomes obvious. The preciousness of each moment reveals itself. The courage to live authentically emerges because the fear of judgment pales in comparison to the fear of an unlived life. This confrontation with mortality is not morbid but vitalizing. It strips away pretense and reveals what is essential. It transforms time from an enemy to be defeated into a gift to be treasured. It makes love more precious because it is finite, meaning more urgent because it must be created now, connection more valuable because it cannot be taken for granted. The 30th truth explores the relationship between solitude and creativity. The modern world has declared war on solitude, filling every moment with stimulation, connection, and activity. But creativity requires empty spaces, mental, emotional, and temporal, where new ideas can germinate. It needs silence where subtle inspirations can be heard, boredom where imagination can awaken, and stillness where deeper currents can be sensed. The fear of being alone with yourself is often a fear of what you might discover in the silence. Will you find emptiness or fullness, anxiety or peace, meaninglessness or profound purpose? These discoveries can only be made through direct experience, through the willingness to sit with yourself without distraction or entertainment. Solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. Solitude is the pleasure of being connected to yourself. In genuine solitude, you remember who you are beneath all the roles you play, all the expectations you carry, all the identities you have accumulated. You reconnect with your own rhythm, your own preferences, your own inner voice. This connection to yourself is the foundation of all creativity. You cannot give birth to something new if you do not know the creative force that lives within you. You cannot express your unique vision if you have never taken the time to discover what that vision is. You cannot offer your gifts to the world if you have never unwrapped them in the privacy of your own presence. The 31st psychological truth addresses the nature of projection in relationships, where we unconsciously cast others in roles from our internal drama. Every significant relationship becomes a stage where unfinished business from the past seeks resolution. The partner who triggers your abandonment fears may be activating wounds from childhood. The friend whose success threatens you may be reflecting your own unlived potential. The authority figure who intimidates you may be embodying the critical parent you carry within. These projections are not conscious choices, but automatic responses of the psyche seeking healing. The unconscious mind recreates familiar dynamics not to torture you, but to provide opportunities for growth and integration. Each triggered reaction is an invitation to explore what within you is asking for attention, what old wound is ready to be healed, what developmental task remains incomplete. The danger lies in remaining unconscious of these projections, in believing that your reactions are entirely about the other person rather than about what they are activating within you. When you make others responsible for your emotional responses, you give away your power and miss the opportunity for genuine growth. When you recognize projection, You reclaim that power and transform relationships from battlegrounds into classrooms. This recognition does not mean that others bear no responsibility for their behavior or that all relationship problems are merely projections. It means taking ownership of your reactions while holding others accountable for their actions. It means using your triggers as information about your inner landscape while maintaining appropriate boundaries with those who cause harm. The 30-second truth explores the phenomenon of resistance and its hidden intelligence. When you encounter internal resistance to change, to healing, to growth, your first impulse may be to overcome it through willpower or positive thinking. But resistance is not the enemy of transformation. It is often its guardian. It protects you from changes you are not ready to integrate, from truths you are not prepared to handle, from growth that would overwhelm your current capacity. Resistance carries information about timing, readiness, and capacity. It may be telling you that you need more support before taking the next step, more healing before facing a particular truth, more development of internal resources before handling increased responsibility. Fighting resistance often strengthens it, while understanding and honoring it can transform it into an ally. The key is learning to dialogue with resistance rather than declaring war on it. What is it protecting? What does it fear? What does it need to feel safe enough to allow change? Sometimes resistance dissolves when it feels heard and understood. Sometimes it reveals practical concerns that need to be addressed before movement can occur. This does not mean becoming passive or using resistance as an excuse for avoiding necessary growth. It means approaching change with the wisdom to discern when to push forward and when to pause, when to challenge yourself and when to offer yourself compassion, when to trust the process and when to question your assumptions. The 33rd psychological truth addresses the relationship between perfectionism and self-worth. Perfectionism is not about high standards or excellence. It is about the belief that you must be flawless to be lovable. It is the fear that if others see your mistakes, your struggles, your humanness, they will reject you completely. This fear drives endless cycles of striving, achieving, and still feeling inadequate, because the goal is not actually accomplishment, but acceptance. The perfectionist lives in constant anxiety because perfection is impossible to achieve and exhausting to maintain. Every mistake becomes evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Every criticism confirms deep-seated fears of unworthiness. The perfectionist's life becomes a performance where authenticity is sacrificed for the illusion of having it all together. But perfection is not only impossible, it is undesirable. It creates distance between you and others because no one can relate to someone who appears to have no struggles. It prevents growth because growth requires making mistakes and learning from them. It blocks creativity because creativity requires experimentation, which inevitably includes failure. The antidote to perfectionism is not lowering your standards, but changing your relationship to mistakes and imperfection. It is recognizing that your worth is not conditional on your performance, that love is not earned through flawlessness, that connection comes through shared humanity rather than shared perfection. This shift from performance to authenticity transforms not only your relationship with yourself, but your capacity for genuine intimacy with others. The 34th truth explores the nature of boundaries and their role in psychological health. Boundaries are not walls built to keep others out, but membranes that allow healthy exchange while protecting your essential self. They determine what energy you allow into your space, what behaviors you will and will not tolerate, what responsibilities belong to you and what belongs to others. Many people struggle with boundaries because they confuse them with selfishness or meanness. They believe that loving others means having no limits, that caring requires endless availability, that kindness means never saying no. But boundaries are actually an expression of love, love for yourself and ultimately for others, because they create the conditions necessary for sustainable relationships. Without boundaries, relationships become imbalanced and resentful. The person with poor boundaries becomes exhausted and bitter from overgiving. The person who encounters no boundaries learns to take without reciprocating. Both dynamics prevent the mutual respect and reciprocity that healthy relationships require. Setting boundaries often feels uncomfortable initially because it activates fears of abandonment, rejection, or conflict. But most healthy people respect boundaries and may even be relieved when you establish them clearly. Those who react poorly to reasonable boundaries are often revealing their own psychological immaturity or their investment in maintaining unhealthy dynamics. The 35th psychological truth addresses the mystery of synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that seem to occur just when you need them most. Carl Jung observed that when internal psychological shifts occur, external events often mirror or support those changes in ways that cannot be explained by causation alone. The book that appears just when you need its message, the person who enters your life at the perfect moment, the opportunity that arises precisely when you are ready for it. These synchronicities are not magical thinking or wishful interpretation, but observations about the interconnected nature of inner and outer reality. When you are aligned with your authentic path, when you are open to growth and change, when you are paying attention to the subtle currents of life, you become more available to possibilities that were always there but previously unnoticed. Synchronicity requires a particular quality of attention, what might be called receptive awareness. This is different from the goal-oriented focus that drives most achievement. It is a way of being present that notices patterns, connections, and opportunities without forcing them. It is the ability to recognize when life is offering you something valuable and to receive it with gratitude. This does not mean becoming passive or waiting for the universe to solve your problems. It means taking inspired action while remaining open to unexpected support and guidance. It means pursuing your goals while staying flexible about how they might manifest. It means trusting that when you align with your deeper purpose, life tends to cooperate in mysterious but reliable ways. The 36th truth explores the relationship between trauma and resilience, revealing how the same experiences that wound can also strengthen. Resilience is not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to navigate struggle with grace, to be changed by difficulty without being broken by it, to find meaning and growth in the midst of pain. Post-traumatic growth is a real phenomenon observed in those who have faced significant challenges and emerged not just intact, but expanded. They often report greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, spiritual development, and clearer priorities. This growth does not justify trauma or suggest that suffering is necessary for development, but it reveals the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to transform poison into medicine. The development of resilience requires both internal resources and external support. Internal resources include emotional regulation skills, meaning-making abilities, self-compassion, and spiritual practices. External resources include supportive relationships, community connections, professional help when needed, and cultural contexts that honor struggle as part of the human journey. Resilience is not built once but cultivated continuously. Each challenge you navigate with awareness and support increases your capacity to handle future difficulties. Each time you choose growth over victim identity, meaning over meaninglessness, connection over isolation, you strengthen the psychological muscles that will serve you in times of crisis. The 37th psychological truth addresses the nature of projection in its most subtle form, the disowning of positive qualities. Just as you project negative traits onto others to avoid acknowledging them in yourself, you also project positive qualities, seeing in others capacities that exist within you but remain undeveloped or unrecognized. The person you admire may be reflecting your own potential for courage. The individual whose creativity inspires you might be showing you your own artistic gifts. The one whose confidence you envy could be mirroring your own inner strength that has not yet found expression. These positive projections are invitations to reclaim aspects of yourself that you have given away or never claimed. This reclamation process requires courage because it means taking responsibility not just for your shadows but for your light. It means acknowledging that you have capacities you have not developed, gifts you have not shared, potential you have not explored. For some people, owning their positive qualities feels more threatening than acknowledging their flaws, because it demands that they step into greater responsibility and visibility. The integration of positive projections transforms admiration into inspiration, envy into motivation, and hero worship into self-empowerment. Instead of living vicariously through others' accomplishments, you begin to cultivate your own. Instead of feeling diminished by others' success, you feel encouraged to explore your own possibilities. The 38th truth explores the relationship between authenticity and social belonging, addressing one of the most painful conflicts in human psychology. The parts of yourself that are most genuine may also be the parts that are least acceptable to others. Your authentic thoughts, feelings, and expressions may challenge social norms, family expectations, or cultural values. This creates an agonizing choice between being true to yourself and being accepted by your community. Many people resolve this conflict by fragmenting themselves, showing different aspects to different people, hiding their full truth from everyone, or completely suppressing their authentic nature in favor of social acceptance. But this fragmentation comes at enormous psychological cost. When you hide your true self, you begin to lose touch with who you really are. When you perform constantly, you forget what it feels like to simply be. The path of authenticity requires finding or creating communities that can appreciate your wholeness. This may mean leaving relationships that require you to diminish yourself. It may mean seeking out others who share your values or interests. It may mean becoming comfortable with smaller circles of deeper connection rather than larger networks of superficial acceptance. But authenticity also requires wisdom about timing, context, and safety. Not every situation calls for complete self-revelation. Not every person has earned the right to know your deepest truths. The goal is not reckless self-expression, but conscious choice about when, where, and with whom to share your authentic self. The 39th psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of emotional contagion and energetic sensitivity. Human beings are far more permeable to each other's emotional states than most realize. You unconsciously absorb the moods, anxieties, and energies of those around you, especially if you are naturally sensitive or empathic. This permeability can be both a gift and a burden, allowing for deep connection while also making you vulnerable to emotional overwhelm. Learning to distinguish between your emotions and those you have absorbed from others is a crucial skill for psychological health. The anxiety you feel may not be yours but something you picked up from a worried friend. The sadness that seems to come from nowhere might be reflecting the grief of someone in your environment. The anger that feels disproportionate could be carrying the unexpressed frustration of those around you. This recognition does not mean you should become closed off or insensitive to others. It means developing what might be called conscious permeability, the ability to feel with others without losing yourself in their emotional states. This requires regular practices of energetic clearing, emotional boundaries, and grounding in your own inner landscape. Those who are naturally sensitive often struggle with this balance, either becoming overwhelmed by others' emotions or shutting down completely to protect themselves. The middle path involves learning to be present with others' experiences while maintaining connection to your own center, to offer compassion without taking on others' pain as your own. The 40th psychological truth explores the relationship between meaning and suffering, addressing one of the most fundamental questions of human existence. Viktor Frankl observed that those who could find meaning in their suffering were more likely to survive extreme circumstances than those who could not. This principle applies not only to extreme situations, but to the ordinary struggles of daily life. Meaning is not something that exists independently in the world waiting to be discovered. It is something you create through your interpretation of events, your choices in response to circumstances, your decision about what matters most. The same experience can be meaningful or meaningless, depending on the framework you use to understand it. This creative aspect of meaning-making is both empowering and terrifying. Empowering because it means you are not at the mercy of circumstances, but can transform any experience through the meaning you assign to it. Terrifying because it places the responsibility for significance squarely on your shoulders rather than in the hands of fate or external authorities. The search for meaning is not about finding the one true purpose of your existence, but about continuously creating significance through your choices and interpretations. It is about deciding what you stand for, what you value, what you want your life to represent. This ongoing creation of meaning is perhaps the most fundamentally human activity, the way consciousness transforms mere existence into a life worth living. As these truths continue to weave themselves through your awareness, you may notice that understanding alone is not enough. Knowledge without integration remains sterile, insight without application remains academic. The real transformation occurs not in the knowing but in the living, not in the understanding but in the embodying of these truths in your daily existence. This integration is a lifelong process, not a destination to reach, but a way of traveling through life. Each day offers opportunities to practice these principles, to choose consciousness over unconsciousness, authenticity over performance, growth over stagnation, love over fear. The goal is not perfection but progress, not the elimination of struggle but the transformation of your relationship to it. The 41st psychological truth ventures into the territory of emotional inheritance, where patterns of feeling and reacting pass through generations like invisible threads connecting past to present. You carry within your nervous system not only your own experiences, but the unprocessed emotions of your ancestors. The grandmother who never grieved her losses may pass that frozen sorrow to her daughter, who passes it to you. The grandfather whose rage was never acknowledged may live on in your inexplicable outbursts. The family's collective shame about poverty, addiction, or trauma may shape your self-worth in ways you never consciously understood. This inheritance is not mystical, but biological and psychological. Trauma literally changes genetic expression, and these changes can be passed to offspring. The ways your parents learned to cope with stress become the template for your own nervous system responses. The emotional climate of your early environment becomes the baseline from which you measure safety and danger throughout your life. But inheritance is not destiny. When you become conscious of these patterns, when you recognize which emotions belong to your personal experience and which have been passed down through generations, you gain the power to transform them. You can become the one who breaks the cycle, who processes what previous generations could not, who heals what was passed down wounded. This healing work is not just personal, it is ancestral. When you resolve patterns that have run through your family line for generations, you free not only yourself, but potentially your descendants. You become what some traditions call an ancestor healer, one who transforms legacy rather than merely passing it forward. The 40-second truth addresses the relationship between attention and reality creation. What you pay attention to literally shapes your experience of reality. Your brain filters the overwhelming amount of sensory information available each moment, selecting what to notice based on your beliefs, fears, desires, and expectations. This filtering process is so complete that you often remain unaware of information that contradicts your existing worldview. If you believe the world is dangerous, you will notice threats everywhere while remaining blind to safety and kindness. If you expect rejection, you will interpret neutral interactions as signs of disapproval while missing genuine expressions of acceptance. If you focus on scarcity, you will see lack in the midst of abundance while overlooking opportunities and resources. This is not positive thinking or wishful fantasy, but neurological fact. Your attention literally sculpts your neural pathways, strengthening connections that support your focus while allowing unused pathways to weaken. Over time, this creates self-reinforcing cycles where your expectations shape your perceptions, which confirm your expectations. Understanding this principle empowers you to become more conscious about where you direct your attention. Instead of being at the mercy of unconscious patterns of focus, you can deliberately choose to notice what supports your growth, what aligns with your values, what opens possibilities rather than closes them. This is not about ignoring problems, but about maintaining enough balance in your attention to see solutions as well as challenges. The 43rd psychological truth explores the nature of psychological defenses and their hidden costs. Every human develops strategies for protecting themselves from overwhelming experiences. These defenses emerge naturally in response to threat, pain, or circumstances beyond your capacity to handle. 2. They serve a vital function in survival, allowing you to continue functioning when direct engagement would be too much. But defenses that serve you in one stage of life can imprison you in another. The emotional numbness that protected you from childhood trauma may prevent you from experiencing joy in adulthood. The hypervigilance that kept you safe in a chaotic environment may exhaust you in peaceful circumstances. The perfectionism that earned approval from critical parents may sabotage your relationships with accepting partners. The challenge is learning to distinguish between current threats and past patterns, between situations that require protection and those that invite openness. This requires developing what might be called defensive flexibility, the ability to access your protective strategies when truly needed while remaining open when safety allows. Dismantling unnecessary defenses is delicate work that cannot be rushed. These patterns developed for good reasons and will not release until they trust that you have other resources available. This often requires building new capacities for emotional regulation, stress management, and relationship skills before old protections feel safe to dissolve. The 44th truth addresses the phenomenon of psychological splitting, where the mind divides experience into categories of all good or all bad to avoid the complexity of ambiguity. This black and white thinking emerges naturally in childhood when the developing mind lacks the capacity to hold contradictions. The parent who is loving one moment and frightening the next cannot be integrated into a single, complex human being, so the child creates separate internal representations. This splitting continues into adulthood in more subtle forms. The partner who disappoints you becomes all bad, while the new romantic interest appears all good. The job that frustrates you has no redeeming qualities, while the opportunity you are considering seems perfect. The political candidate you oppose is completely wrong, while the one you support can do no wrong. But reality exists in shades of grey, and psychological maturity requires developing tolerance for ambiguity, contradiction, and complexity. People can be both loving and selfish, situations can be both beneficial and harmful, choices can be both right and wrong depending on perspective and timing. Integration means learning to hold multiple truths simultaneously without needing to resolve them into simple categories. It means accepting that you can love someone and still be frustrated by them, that you can appreciate an opportunity while acknowledging its drawbacks, that you can make the best choice available while recognizing its limitations. The 45th psychological truth ventures into the relationship between identity and attachment. Much of what you consider your identity is actually a collection of attachments to roles, relationships, beliefs, possessions, achievements, and images of yourself. These attachments provide security and meaning, but also create vulnerability because they can be threatened or lost. When your identity depends heavily on external factors, you become fragile in the face of change. The loss of a relationship threatens not just companionship, but your sense of self as a partner. Career setbacks challenge not only your income, but your identity as a successful person. Physical changes affect not just your body, but your self-image and confidence. This attachment-based identity creates what might be called existential anxiety, the fear that if you lose what you are attached to, you will cease to exist in any meaningful way. This fear drives desperate attempts to control outcomes, maintain appearances, and prevent change, all of which ultimately create more suffering. The alternative is developing what some traditions call non-attached identity, a sense of self that exists independently of circumstances, roles, or external validation. This does not mean becoming indifferent or disconnected, but rather maintaining a core sense of self that remains stable regardless of what happens to the things you are attached to. This stability comes from identifying with the awareness that observes your experiences rather than with the experiences themselves. You are not your thoughts, but the one who thinks them. You are not your emotions, but the one who feels them. You are not your roles, but the one who plays them. This shift in identification creates a foundation that cannot be shaken by external changes. The 46th truth explores the nature of psychological projection in intimate relationships, where unconscious patterns play out with particular intensity. In close relationships, you tend to attract and be attracted to people who carry the disowned aspects of your own psyche. The confident partner may be carrying the assertiveness you never developed. The emotional partner may be expressing the feelings you learned to suppress. These attractions are not random but serve the psyche's drive toward wholeness. Through relationship, you have the opportunity to reclaim the parts of yourself you have projected onto others. But this reclamation requires consciousness. Without awareness, you may simply live vicariously through your partner's expression of these qualities while never developing them yourself. The person who attracts highly emotional partners but considers themselves rational may be avoiding their own feeling nature. The individual who chooses creative partners while seeing themselves as practical may be projecting their artistic potential. The one who is drawn to adventurous people while viewing themselves as cautious may be disowning their own desire for exploration. Healthy relationships become laboratories for psychological integration, where both people support each other in reclaiming projected aspects. This creates growth and depth, but also challenges because it requires both partners to face what they have been avoiding within themselves. The 47th psychological truth addresses the relationship between control and surrender, two forces that must be balanced for psychological health. The need for control arises from the fundamental human requirement for safety and predictability. In a world of uncertainty, the ability to influence outcomes provides security and reduces anxiety. But excessive control becomes rigid and exhausting, preventing the natural flow of life and cutting you off from spontaneity and surprise. Surrender, on the other hand, involves releasing attachment to specific outcomes and trusting in larger processes beyond your direct control. This can feel terrifying to the ego, which interprets surrender as vulnerability or passivity. But conscious surrender is actually a form of power, the power to flow with life rather than fighting against it, to respond to what is rather than insisting on what should be. The balance between control and surrender varies depending on circumstances. Some situations call for decisive action and strong boundaries. Others require patience and acceptance of what cannot be changed. Wisdom lies in discerning which response serves each moment rather than defaulting to habitual patterns of excessive control or passive resignation. This balance is particularly crucial in creative endeavors, where too much control stifles inspiration while too little structure prevents manifestation. The artist must surrender to the creative flow while maintaining enough discipline to give it form. The entrepreneur must trust their vision while taking practical steps to realize it. The 48th truth explores the phenomenon of developmental trauma, which occurs not from single shocking events, but from chronic patterns of neglect, inconsistency, or misattunement during critical developmental periods. This form of trauma is often invisible because it involves the absence of what should have been present rather than the presence of obvious harm. The child who receives adequate physical care but little emotional attunement develops differently than one who experiences both physical and emotional nurturing. The infant whose cries are consistently ignored learns different lessons about trust and connection than one whose needs are met with sensitivity. These early experiences create templates for how relationships work, what can be expected from others, and what strategies are necessary for survival. Developmental trauma often manifests as difficulty with emotional regulation, challenges in forming secure attachments, problems with self-worth, and confusion about boundaries. Because these patterns develop so early, they feel like fundamental aspects of personality rather than adaptations to inadequate care. Healing developmental trauma requires a different approach than healing single-incident trauma. It involves slowly building capacities that were never properly developed, learning skills that should have been acquired in childhood, and gradually updating beliefs about self and others that were formed in immature nervous systems responding to inadequate environments. This healing often happens in relationship, where corrective experiences can gradually replace old templates. The therapist who provides consistent attunement, the friend who offers reliable support, the partner who demonstrates trustworthy love, all of these can contribute to the slow rewiring of developmental patterns. The 49th psychological truth addresses the nature of psychological boundaries and their role in individuation. Boundaries are not just about what you will and will not tolerate from others, but about maintaining the integrity of your psychological space. They determine what influences you allow into your mental and emotional environment, what responsibilities you accept as yours, and how much of yourself you share with different people. Poor boundaries manifest in many ways: taking on others' emotions as your own, feeling responsible for others' happiness, being unable to say no to requests, sharing personal information indiscriminately, or allowing others to make decisions that should be yours. These patterns often develop in childhood when boundaries were violated or never properly established. Healthy boundaries are permeable rather than rigid, allowing for appropriate exchange while maintaining individual integrity. They involve knowing where you end and others begin, what belongs to your experience and what belongs to theirs, what you can influence and what lies beyond your control. Establishing boundaries often triggers guilt because it requires disappointing others or challenging established patterns. But boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary for authentic relationship. When you maintain your psychological integrity, you can offer genuine presence rather than performance, real support rather than codependent enabling. The 50th truth explores the relationship between shame and authenticity, addressing one of the most fundamental barriers to psychological freedom. Shame is the belief that something is fundamentally wrong with who you are at your core. Unlike guilt, which addresses specific actions, shame attacks your basic worthiness and belonging. It whispers that if others really knew you, they would reject you completely. Shame thrives in secrecy and isolation, convincing you that your struggles, mistakes, and imperfections make you uniquely flawed. It drives perfectionism, people-pleasing, and the exhausting performance of being someone other than who you are. The more energy you spend hiding what you believe is shameful, the less energy remains for authentic living. But shame is built on false premises. The aspects of yourself that feel most shameful are often the most human parts of you. your struggles, vulnerabilities, mistakes, and imperfections. These do not make you defective, they make you relatable. The person who has never struggled cannot offer comfort to those who do. The individual who has never failed cannot understand the courage required to try again. Healing shame requires the radical act of being witnessed in your wholeness, not just your successes but your struggles, not just your strengths but your vulnerabilities. This witnessing can happen in therapy, in intimate relationships, in support groups, or in spiritual communities where authenticity is valued over performance. The 51st psychological truth addresses the nature of psychological defenses and their relationship to creativity. The same mechanisms that protect you from overwhelming experiences can also limit your access to inspiration, intuition, and creative flow. The walls you build to keep out pain may also keep out beauty, wonder, and possibility. Creative expression requires a certain permeability, an openness to influences and experiences that cannot be entirely controlled or predicted. The artist must be willing to feel deeply, to be moved by beauty and pain alike, to remain sensitive to subtle currents of meaning and emotion. This sensitivity can feel dangerous to a psyche that has learned to protect itself through numbing or control. But creativity also provides a way to metabolize difficult experiences, transforming pain into beauty, chaos into meaning, isolation into connection. The poem that emerges from a heartbreak, the painting that captures inner turmoil, the song that gives voice to unspoken longing, all of these serve both personal healing and collective recognition. The balance between protection and openness is delicate and individual. Some people need to strengthen their boundaries before they can safely explore creative expression. Others need to soften their defenses to allow inspiration to flow. The key is developing enough internal stability to remain open to experience without being overwhelmed by it. The 52nd truth explores the phenomenon of psychological contagion and the responsibility that comes with emotional influence. Your emotional state affects everyone around you in ways both subtle and profound. The anxiety you carry into a room influences the nervous systems of others. The peace you embody has a calming effect on those in your presence. The anger you suppress may emerge in the irritability of those close to you. This influence operates below the threshold of conscious awareness through mechanisms science is only beginning to understand. Mirror neurons fire in resonance with others' expressions. Pheromones carry chemical information about emotional states. Energy fields interact in ways that affect mood and perception. The boundaries between self and other are far more permeable than most people realize. Understanding this interconnection brings both power and responsibility. You cannot control how others respond to your presence, but you can take responsibility for the quality of energy you bring to interactions. This does not mean suppressing authentic emotions, but rather processing them consciously rather than unconsciously broadcasting them. The person who consistently brings chaos to gatherings, who spreads anxiety through their presence, who infects others with their negativity, may be unaware of their impact. But ignorance does not eliminate responsibility. Part of emotional maturity involves recognizing your influence and choosing to use it consciously rather than carelessly. The 53rd psychological truth addresses the relationship between trauma and resilience, exploring how the same experiences that wound can also strengthen. Post-traumatic growth is a documented phenomenon where individuals emerge from significant challenges not just intact, but expanded. They often report greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, enhanced spiritual awareness, and clearer priorities. This growth does not justify trauma or suggest that suffering is necessary for development. Rather, it reveals the remarkable capacity of consciousness to transform poison into medicine, to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create beauty from ashes. The process requires both time and conscious engagement with the experience rather than simple survival or denial. Resilience is not a fixed trait, but a developable capacity. It involves learning to regulate emotional responses, to find meaning in difficult experiences, to maintain hope in dark times, and to reach out for support when needed. These skills can be cultivated through practice, just like physical fitness can be developed through exercise. The cultivation of resilience also requires recognizing that strength and vulnerability are not opposites but partners. The person who can acknowledge their wounds is often stronger than the one who denies them. The individual who can ask for help demonstrates more courage than the one who suffers in silence. True resilience includes the wisdom to know when to endure and when to seek support. The 54th Truth explores the nature of psychological integration and the lifelong process of becoming whole. Integration is not about eliminating contradictions or achieving perfect consistency, but about creating space within yourself for the full spectrum of human experience. It means learning to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to embrace both your light and shadow, to accept your complexity rather than trying to resolve it into simplicity. This process requires what might be called radical self-acceptance, not approval of every behavior or thought, but acknowledgement of every aspect of your experience as part of your human journey. The parts of yourself you find most unacceptable often carry important information or energy that, when integrated, becomes a source of strength rather than shame. Integration happens gradually through countless small acts of acknowledgement, acceptance, and conscious choice. Each time you recognize a disowned aspect of yourself, each time you feel a difficult emotion without judgment, each time you choose authenticity over performance, you take a step toward wholeness. This is not a destination to reach, but a way of traveling through life. The integrated person is not someone who has achieved perfection, but someone who continues to embrace their imperfection with compassion, who meets their contradictions with curiosity, who approaches their complexity with reverence rather than judgment. As these truths continue to settle into the deeper layers of your consciousness, you may notice that transformation is not something that happens to you, but something that happens through you. You are not a passive recipient of change, but an active participant in your own evolution. Every moment offers an opportunity to choose consciousness over unconsciousness, authenticity over performance, love over fear. The work of psychological development is both deeply personal and inherently collective. As you heal your own wounds, you contribute to the healing of the whole. As you reclaim your own authenticity, you give others permission to do the same. As you transform your own patterns, you help shift the collective patterns that shape human experience. This is perhaps the deepest truth of all. You are not separate from the whole, but an integral part of it. Your individual healing contributes to collective healing. Your personal growth serves something larger than yourself. Your journey toward wholeness is simultaneously a journey toward connection with yourself, with others, with life itself. The 55th psychological truth ventures into the labyrinth of memory and its malleable nature. What you remember is not a faithful recording of what occurred, but a creative reconstruction influenced by current beliefs, emotional states, and unconscious needs. Each time you recall an experience, you subtly alter it, weaving new interpretations into old narratives, coloring past events with present understanding. This fluidity of memory is not a flaw, but a feature of consciousness seeking coherence and meaning. The mind continuously updates its story to maintain psychological stability, to make sense of contradictions, to support current identity and worldview. The childhood memory that once felt purely painful may acquire new dimensions of understanding as you mature. The relationship that seemed perfect in recollection may reveal its shadows when examined with adult wisdom. Understanding this reconstructive nature of memory liberates you from the tyranny of the past as fixed and unchangeable. If memory is creative rather than archival, then healing becomes possible at any moment. You can revisit old experiences with new resources, reframe past events with expanded awareness, and literally change how history lives within your psyche. But this power comes with responsibility. The temptation to rewrite history in service of comfort rather than truth can lead to self-deception and the avoidance of necessary learning. The goal is not to create pleasant fiction, but to find authentic meaning that serves growth rather than stagnation. The 56th truth addresses the phenomenon of psychological inheritance through language itself. The words you use to describe your experience literally shape your reality. The vocabulary available to you determines what aspects of experience you can recognize, articulate, and therefore transform. Cultures with rich emotional vocabularies produce individuals with greater emotional sophistication. Languages that distinguish subtle gradations of feeling enable more nuanced self-awareness. Consider how different it feels to say, "I am angry" versus "I am disappointed," "I am furious," or "I am indignant." Each word carries distinct energetic signatures, suggests different responses, and opens different possibilities for understanding and action. The person who can only name gross emotional categories remains limited in their capacity for emotional intelligence. This linguistic shaping extends beyond emotion to every aspect of psychological experience. The concepts you possess for describing relationships, motivations, spiritual experiences, and personal growth determine what you can perceive and therefore what you can develop. Expanding your psychological vocabulary literally expands your psychological possibilities. But vocabulary alone is insufficient without the willingness to feel what the words point toward. The person who can name 50 types of sadness but refuses to experience any of them remains emotionally impoverished despite their linguistic sophistication. Knowledge must be embodied to become wisdom. The 57th psychological truth explores the relationship between attention and love, revealing that where you place your conscious awareness is one of the most profound expressions of care available to you. To truly attend to something or someone is to offer the gift of presence, to make space in your consciousness for their reality to exist and be witnessed. Most people scatter their attention like seeds on rocky ground, giving partial awareness to multiple objects without fully engaging with any. They listen while planning their response, observe while judging what they see, experience while thinking about what comes next. This fragmented attention creates a sense of disconnection and superficiality that pervades modern life. True attention is concentrated presence that creates depth and intimacy in whatever it touches. When you give someone your full attention, They feel seen in a way that is both rare and healing. When you attend completely to your own inner experience, you develop the self-knowledge that authentic living requires. This quality of attention cannot be forced but must be cultivated through practice. It requires releasing the compulsive need to be elsewhere, to be thinking about something else, to be preparing for what comes next. It demands the courage to be fully present with what is actually happening rather than escaping into mental commentary or emotional reactivity. The 58th truth addresses the nature of psychological projection in its most subtle and pervasive form, the projection of your own capacity for growth onto others. You may find yourself constantly trying to help others develop, to see their potential, to encourage their transformation, while remaining blind to the same possibilities within yourself. This outward focus on others' development often masks a deep ambivalence about your own growth. It is safer to see potential in others than to claim it for yourself. It requires less courage to encourage someone else's dreams than to pursue your own. It feels more noble to facilitate others' healing than to face your own wounds. But this external focus, however well-intentioned, can become a sophisticated form of avoidance. The energy you spend trying to change others is energy unavailable for your own transformation. The clarity you bring to others' patterns may contrast sharply with the blind spots you maintain about your own. The shift from fixing others to developing yourself is not selfish, but essential. When you focus on your own growth with the same passion you bring to helping others, you become genuinely capable of service rather than codependent enabling. Your own transformation becomes the foundation for authentic contribution to others' development. The 59th psychological truth ventures into the territory of existential anxiety and its hidden gifts. The awareness of life's temporary nature, of uncertainty's constant presence, of meaning's constructed rather than discovered nature, creates a fundamental unease that most people spend enormous energy trying to escape. This existential anxiety manifests as the fear of death, the terror of meaninglessness, the panic of freedom, and the weight of responsibility for creating significance in an apparently indifferent universe. These fears drive much of human behavior, the desperate pursuit of permanence, the frantic search for external validation, the compulsive need to stay busy and distracted. But existential anxiety also serves as a gateway to authentic living. When you stop running from these fundamental concerns and turn to face them directly, they reveal their hidden wisdom. The awareness of mortality makes each moment precious. The recognition of uncertainty opens space for possibility. The responsibility for creating meaning empowers conscious choice. This confrontation with existential realities is not comfortable, but it is liberating. It strips away pretense and reveals what truly matters. It transforms time from an enemy to be conquered into a gift to be treasured. It makes every choice significant because you recognize that you are continuously creating the meaning of your existence. The 60th truth explores the relationship between psychological health and the capacity to hold paradox. Mental rigidity often manifests as the inability to tolerate contradiction, ambiguity, or complexity. The mind seeks simple explanations, clear categories, and definitive answers, but reality rarely cooperates with these preferences. Life is fundamentally paradoxical. You must care deeply while holding lightly. You need both solitude and connection, structure and flexibility, confidence and humility. You are simultaneously powerful and powerless, knowing and ignorant, separate and interconnected. These paradoxes cannot be resolved through logic, but must be lived through experience. The capacity to hold paradox without needing to resolve it into false simplicity is a mark of psychological maturity. It allows for nuanced thinking, complex relationships, and creative solutions that honor multiple truths simultaneously. It prevents the black and white thinking that creates unnecessary conflict and missed opportunities. This tolerance for paradox extends to your relationship with yourself. You can love yourself while acknowledging your flaws, feel confident while remaining open to learning, be strong while accepting vulnerability. These apparent contradictions are not problems to solve, but complexities to embrace. The 61st psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of energetic resonance and its role in attraction and repulsion. You are continuously broadcasting and receiving energetic information that operates below conscious awareness but profoundly influences your interactions and relationships. This resonance field carries information about your emotional state, your level of consciousness, your unresolved conflicts, and your authentic desires. People respond to this energetic signature often more than to your words or conscious presentations. The person who seems confident but carries deep insecurity will attract others who sense and are drawn to that hidden vulnerability. The individual who appears successful but feels empty inside will magnetize those who resonate with inner emptiness. This unconscious communication explains why some people consistently attract similar types of relationships or situations regardless of their conscious intentions. The patterns they carry energetically continue to draw corresponding patterns from others. Changing these attractions requires internal transformation rather than external manipulation, but energetic resonance also creates opportunities for healing and growth. When you do your own inner work, when you integrate your shadows and embrace your authenticity, you begin to attract people and situations that reflect your increased wholeness. Your external world becomes a mirror of your internal development. The 60-second truth explores the relationship between creativity and madness, not as pathology, but as states of consciousness that dissolve ordinary boundaries. Creative inspiration often arises from the same psychological territories that produce altered states, mystical experiences, and what conventional thinking might label as mental instability. The creative process requires a willingness to temporarily abandon rational control, to allow unconscious material to surface, to follow inspiration even when it leads into unknown territory. This surrender can feel dangerous to a mind accustomed to maintaining order and predictability. Yet it is precisely this willingness to lose yourself that allows something new to be born through you. Many creative individuals struggle with this balance between inspiration and stability, between opening to the unknown and maintaining functional capacity. The key lies in developing what might be called creative boundaries, the ability to open to inspiration while maintaining enough structure to channel it productively. This dance between order and chaos, control and surrender, known and unknown, is not just relevant to artistic endeavors, but to all forms of creative living. Every authentic choice, every original response, every moment of genuine self-expression requires this willingness to step beyond the familiar into the territory of possibility. The 63rd psychological truth addresses the nature of emotional inheritance through family systems. You carry within your nervous system not only your own emotional experiences, but the unprocessed feelings of your family lineage. The grandmother who never mourned her losses may pass that frozen grief to subsequent generations. The grandfather whose rage was never acknowledged may live on in your unexplained outbursts. These inherited patterns operate through multiple mechanisms: genetic expression, learned behavior, family mythology, and energetic transmission. The emotional climate of your early environment becomes the baseline from which you measure safety and danger throughout life. The coping strategies your parents used become your default responses to stress, but recognition of these patterns creates the possibility of transformation. When you become conscious of what belongs to your personal experience and what has been inherited from previous generations, you can choose which patterns to continue and which to transform. You can become the one who processes what earlier generations could not handle. This healing work serves not only your own liberation, but the liberation of your lineage. When you resolve patterns that have run through your family for generations, you create the possibility of passing forward healing rather than trauma, consciousness rather than unconscious repetition. The 64th truth explores the relationship between spiritual development and psychological integration. True spiritual growth cannot bypass psychological health, but must include and transcend it. The person who seeks enlightenment while avoiding their emotional life, their relational patterns, or their unconscious material creates what some call spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid psychological work. This avoidance creates a false spirituality that may appear elevated but lacks the grounded wisdom that comes from having faced and integrated your human complexity. The spiritual seeker who cannot maintain healthy relationships, who projects their shadows onto others, or who uses spiritual concepts to justify emotional immaturity has not achieved genuine development but sophisticated self-deception. Authentic spiritual development includes psychological development as its foundation. You cannot transcend what you have not first acknowledged and integrated. The shadow work, the emotional healing, the relational skills, the capacity for intimacy, all of these are not obstacles to spiritual growth, but essential components of it. When psychological and spiritual development proceed together, they create a grounded transcendence that is both practical and profound. The person who has done this integrated work can be both deeply human and authentically spiritual, both rooted in earthly reality and open to transcendent possibility. The 65th psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of conscious choice and its relationship to freedom. Most people believe they are making conscious choices when they are actually operating from unconscious patterns, conditioned responses, and habitual reactions. True choice requires awareness of options, understanding of consequences, and the capacity to act from values rather than impulses. Unconscious choice is driven by past conditioning, emotional reactivity, and the desire to avoid discomfort. It seeks the familiar even when the familiar is destructive, chooses the known even when the known is limiting. This pseudo-choice creates the illusion of agency while perpetuating patterns that prevent growth. Conscious choice emerges from awareness of your patterns, understanding of your motivations, and commitment to values that transcend immediate gratification. It requires the capacity to tolerate discomfort in service of growth, to choose the unknown when it serves your development, to act from wisdom rather than impulse. This level of choice-making is not achieved once, but must be cultivated continuously. Each moment offers opportunities to choose consciousness over unconsciousness, growth over stagnation, love over fear. The accumulation of these conscious choices gradually transforms your life from a series of reactions into a deliberate creation. The 66th truth explores the relationship between authenticity and performance, addressing one of the most subtle challenges of psychological development. As you become more aware of your patterns, more skilled at emotional regulation, more conscious of your impact on others, there is a danger of turning these capacities into new forms of performance rather than expressions of genuine authenticity. The person who has learned to be vulnerable may perform vulnerability to gain connection. The individual who has developed emotional intelligence may use it to manipulate rather than to relate authentically. The one who has cultivated spiritual practices may display their development to gain admiration rather than to serve their growth. This sophisticated performance can be more difficult to recognize than crude inauthenticity because it uses the language and behaviors of genuine development while serving ego needs rather than sole purposes. It requires constant vigilance to distinguish between authentic expression and subtle performance. The antidote to spiritual or psychological performance is regular return to your deeper motivations. Why are you developing these capacities? Whom do they serve? What happens when no one is watching? The authentic person continues their growth work whether or not it is witnessed, appreciated, or rewarded by others. The 67th psychological truth addresses the nature of timing in psychological development. Growth cannot be forced or rushed, but must unfold according to its own organic intelligence. Each stage of development requires certain capacities, experiences, and readiness that cannot be artificially created or bypassed through willpower alone. The person who tries to heal too quickly may re-traumatize themselves by taking on more than their system can integrate. The individual who pushes for insights before they have developed the emotional capacity to handle them may become overwhelmed rather than enlightened. The one who attempts advanced practices without foundational stability may destabilize rather than develop. This organic timing is often frustrating to the goal-oriented mind that wants to control and accelerate the process. But psychological development is more like growing a garden than building a machine. It requires patience, consistent care, appropriate conditions, and trust in natural processes. Learning to recognize your own developmental timing is a crucial skill. This means knowing when to push yourself and when to rest, when to seek new challenges, and when to integrate what you already have, when to open to new experiences, and when to deepen existing understanding. The 68th truth explores the relationship between individual healing and collective transformation. Your personal psychological work is not just about your own well-being, but contributes to the healing of the larger systems of which you are part. As you transform your patterns, you influence your family system, your community, and the collective consciousness itself. This influence operates through multiple channels. The healing you do becomes available to others through your presence, your relationships, your creative expressions, and your service. The patterns you break in your own life create the possibility for others to break similar patterns. The consciousness you develop ripples outward in ways you may never directly witness. But this collective dimension of personal work also brings responsibility. Your unconscious patterns don't just affect you, but influence everyone in your sphere of contact. Your unhealed wounds may be passed on to your children. Your unprocessed emotions may contaminate your relationships. Your unconscious biases may perpetuate harmful systems. This recognition transforms personal growth from a selfish pursuit into a form of service. When you heal yourself, you heal the world. When you develop consciousness, you contribute to collective awakening. When you transform your patterns, you create possibilities for others to do the same. The 69th psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of psychological projection in leadership and authority relationships. Those in positions of power often become screens onto which others project their unresolved relationships with authority, their unmet needs for guidance, and their disowned power. This creates complex dynamics where the leader's actual qualities become secondary to the projections placed upon them. The person who never received adequate parenting may project parental qualities onto leaders, expecting care and guidance that is not appropriate to the relationship. The individual who fears their own power may project omnipotence onto authorities, seeing them as either saviors or tyrants. These projections distort perception and prevent authentic relationship. But leaders also project onto their followers, seeing in them reflections of their own disowned qualities. The authoritarian leader may project their own dependence onto followers, seeing them as weak and needy. The charismatic leader may project their own need for admiration onto others, believing they require inspiration and motivation. Healthy authority relationships require both leaders and followers to own their projections and relate to each other as whole human beings rather than as symbols or objects. This creates space for authentic influence, mutual respect, and collaborative growth rather than dependent or exploitative dynamics. The 70th psychological truth explores the relationship between trauma and time, revealing how traumatic experiences exist outside normal temporal flow. In the unconscious, past trauma continues to live in present moment awareness, creating reactions as if threatening events were happening now rather than years or decades ago. This temporal distortion explains why trauma survivors may have intense reactions to seemingly minor triggers, why they may feel unsafe in objectively safe situations, why they may continue to organize their lives around threats that no longer exist. The nervous system, designed to protect against danger, continues to respond to historical rather than current reality. Healing trauma requires bringing these frozen experiences back into the flow of time, helping the nervous system recognize that the past is past and the present is different. This process cannot be accomplished through rational understanding alone, but requires somatic and emotional integration that allows the body to release its protective responses. The work of trauma healing is essentially the work of temporal integration, helping past, present, and future to resume their natural relationship rather than being collapsed into an eternal now of hypervigilance and reactivity. This restoration of temporal flow allows for genuine presence and authentic response to current reality. As these truths continue to weave themselves through your consciousness, you may notice that understanding is not the same as transformation. Knowledge without embodiment remains intellectual exercise. Insight without integration remains spiritual entertainment. The real work begins when you close the gap between knowing and being, between understanding and living these truths in your daily existence. This embodiment is not a destination, but a practice, not an achievement, but a way of traveling through life. Each day offers countless opportunities to choose consciousness over unconsciousness authenticity over performance, growth over comfort, love over fear. The accumulation of these choices gradually transforms not only your inner landscape, but your external reality as well. The 71st psychological truth addresses the nature of psychological boundaries in the digital age, where the traditional barriers between inner and outer experience have become increasingly permeable. Social media, constant connectivity, and information overload create unprecedented challenges for maintaining psychological integrity and authentic self-knowledge. The stream of others' curated lives, opinions, and emotional states can overwhelm your own inner voice, making it difficult to distinguish between your authentic thoughts and feelings and those you have absorbed from your digital environment. The constant comparison with others' presentations creates internal pressure to perform rather than simply be. This digital saturation also fragments attention, making the sustained focus necessary for deep self-reflection increasingly difficult. The mind becomes accustomed to rapid shifts, immediate gratification, and external stimulation, losing its capacity for the patient, quiet observation that psychological development requires. Reclaiming psychological boundaries in this environment requires intentional practices of disconnection, silence, and inner attunement. It means creating spaces of solitude where your own thoughts and feelings can emerge without external influence, where your authentic preferences can be discovered rather than determined by algorithmic suggestions. The 72nd truth explores the relationship between psychological development and physical embodiment. The body holds memories, patterns, and wisdom that the mind cannot access through thinking alone. Trauma lives in muscle tension, unexpressed emotions create physical symptoms, and spiritual insights must be integrated somatically to become genuine transformation. Many approaches to psychological growth focus exclusively on mental and emotional processes while ignoring the body's intelligence. But lasting change requires engaging the whole person. Mind, emotions, body, and spirit working in integrated harmony. The person who changes their thinking without shifting their physical patterns often finds their insights remaining superficial and temporary. This embodied approach to development recognizes that the body is not just a vessel for consciousness, but an active participant in psychological transformation. Breathing patterns affect emotional states, posture influences confidence, movement releases trapped energy, and physical practices can access states of consciousness that mental efforts alone cannot reach. The integration of body awareness into psychological work creates more sustainable and comprehensive transformation. When changes occur at the somatic level, they tend to be more lasting because they are encoded in the nervous system itself rather than remaining at the level of mental concepts. The 73rd psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of psychological contagion in collective environments. Groups develop their own psychological atmosphere that influences individual behavior in profound but often unrecognized ways. The family system, workplace culture, community norms, and social movements all create psychological fields that shape how people think, feel, and act. This collective influence operates through multiple mechanisms: shared beliefs, emotional resonance, behavioral modeling, and energetic transmission. Individuals often adopt the psychological patterns of their groups without conscious awareness, mistaking collective conditioning for personal preferences or natural responses. Understanding this collective dimension of psychology is crucial for maintaining individual autonomy while participating in group life. It requires developing the capacity to recognize when your thoughts, emotions, or behaviors are being influenced by group dynamics rather than emerging from your authentic self. The conscious individual learns to participate in collective life while maintaining psychological independence, to contribute to group purposes while preserving personal integrity, to be influenced by others without losing touch with their own truth. This balance between individual and collective consciousness is essential for both personal development and healthy community life. The 74th Truth explores the relationship between psychological development and creative expression. Creativity is not just about artistic production, but about the fundamental human capacity to generate new possibilities, to respond to life in original ways, to bring forth what has never existed before. This creative capacity is intimately connected to psychological health because it requires access to the full spectrum of inner experience, emotions, intuitions, memories, dreams, and unconscious material. The person who has cut themselves off from parts of their inner world has limited their creative resources and reduced their capacity for original response. Creativity also serves psychological development by providing a means of expressing and integrating complex inner experiences. The poem that emerges from heartbreak, the painting that captures internal conflict, the dance that embodies transformation, all of these serve both artistic and therapeutic functions. But creativity requires courage because it involves bringing the unknown into the known, risking failure and judgment, revealing aspects of yourself that may not be socially acceptable. This courage is developed through psychological work that builds tolerance for uncertainty, acceptance of imperfection, and trust in the creative process. The 75th Psychological Truth addresses the nature of psychological resilience and its relationship to meaning-making. Resilience is not about avoiding difficulties or maintaining constant optimism, but about the capacity to find significance in struggle, to grow through challenge, and to maintain hope in the face of adversity. This resilience is built through the development of meaning-making capacities, the ability to create significance from experience, to find purpose in pain, to discover growth opportunities in setbacks. The person who can find meaning in their struggles is more likely to survive and thrive than the one who experiences difficulty as purely random or punitive. But meaning-making is not about positive thinking or denial of genuine hardship. It requires honest acknowledgement of pain while maintaining openness to its potential gifts. It means facing reality fully while retaining faith in the possibility of transformation and growth. This capacity for meaning-making is developed through practice, through repeatedly choosing to look for significance and learning opportunities in challenging experiences. Over time, this practice builds psychological muscle that can handle increasingly difficult circumstances while maintaining hope and purpose. And the 76th Truth explores the relationship between psychological health and the capacity for solitude. The ability to be alone with yourself without distraction or entertainment is one of the most reliable indicators of psychological maturity. It requires comfort with your own thoughts, acceptance of your emotional states, and tolerance for the silence that allows deeper truths to emerge. Many people fear solitude because they fear what they might discover in the quiet, their loneliness, their anxiety, their unfulfilled dreams, their unlived life. They fill every moment with activity, entertainment, or social interaction to avoid confronting these deeper realities. But this avoidance prevents the self-knowledge that authentic living requires. True solitude is not loneliness, but communion with yourself. It is the space where you can hear your authentic voice beneath the noise of social expectations, where you can feel your genuine emotions beneath the performance of social roles, where you can connect with your deeper purposes beneath the distractions of daily life. Regular solitude is not a luxury, but a necessity for psychological health. It allows the nervous system to reset, the mind to integrate experiences, and the soul to remember its own nature. Without this regular return to yourself, you become lost in the expectations and energies of others. The 77th psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of psychological projection in social and political movements. Groups often define themselves not just by what they stand for, but by what they oppose, creating shadow projections that distort perception and prevent genuine understanding of complex issues. The tendency to see all wisdom in your own group and all ignorance in opposing groups, to attribute pure motives to your allies and evil intentions to your opponents, to see complexity in your own position while viewing others' perspectives as simplistic. These patterns reveal projection rather than accurate perception. This collective shadow projection prevents the nuanced thinking that complex social issues require. It creates polarization that makes dialogue impossible and solutions unlikely. It turns political engagement into psychological warfare, where winning becomes more important than understanding or genuine problem solving. The conscious individual learns to recognize their own projections while remaining engaged with important social issues. They can advocate for their values while maintaining curiosity about opposing viewpoints, can work for change while acknowledging the complexity of systemic problems, can be passionate about their causes while remaining humble about their understanding. The 78th psychological truth explores the relationship between psychological development and the integration of opposites. Mental health is not about eliminating negative emotions or achieving constant positivity, but about developing the capacity to hold the full spectrum of human experience with grace and wisdom. This integration of opposites, joy and sorrow, confidence and humility, strength and vulnerability, independence and connection, creates psychological flexibility and resilience. The person who can only access one pole of experience becomes rigid and fragile, unable to adapt to life's changing demands. But integration does not mean balance in the sense of equal amounts of each quality. Different situations call for different responses. Sometimes strength is needed, sometimes vulnerability, sometimes independence serves, sometimes connection. The integrated person has access to the full range of human capacities and can respond appropriately to each situation. The development of this capacity requires moving beyond the either-or thinking that characterizes psychological immaturity toward the both-and awareness that marks genuine wisdom. This shift allows for paradox, complexity, and the recognition that truth often exists in the tension between opposites rather than in the elimination of one pole. The 79th psychological truth addresses the nature of psychological wounds and their transformation into sources of wisdom and compassion. Your deepest injuries often become your greatest teachers, not because suffering is inherently valuable, but because the process of healing these wounds develops capacities that remain unavailable to the untraumatized psyche. The person who has never experienced betrayal cannot understand the courage required to trust again. The individual who has never faced despair cannot offer authentic hope to those in darkness. The one who has never struggled with their own demons cannot provide genuine guidance to others wrestling with similar forces. This transformation of wounds into wisdom is not automatic, but requires conscious engagement with your pain rather than avoidance or denial. It demands the courage to feel what you have been afraid to feel, to explore what you have been reluctant to examine, to find meaning in experiences that initially seem meaningless. But this process also requires discernment about when to engage with wounds and when to create distance from them. Not every moment is appropriate for deep healing work. Sometimes protection and stabilization must precede integration and transformation. The 80th truth explores the relationship between psychological authenticity and social courage. Living authentically in a world that often rewards conformity requires tremendous bravery. It means risking disapproval, rejection, and misunderstanding in service of personal integrity and truthful expression. This courage is not about rebellious defiance or narcissistic self-assertion, but about the quiet strength to remain true to your deepest values even when external pressures encourage compromise. It involves speaking your truth even when your voice shakes, making choices that align with your soul, even when they conflict with social expectations. The fear of authenticity often stems from early experiences where being genuine resulted in punishment, rejection, or abandonment. These wounds create internal voices that warn against the dangers of self-revelation, that counsel safety through performance and conformity. Healing these fears requires both internal work to address the underlying wounds and external practice in expressing authenticity in safe relationships. Gradually, you build evidence that you can be genuine and still be loved, that authenticity attracts the kind of connections that truly nourish your soul. The 81st psychological truth addresses the phenomenon of emotional inheritance through cultural and generational patterns. You carry within your psyche not only your family's unprocessed emotions, but the collective traumas and triumphs of your cultural heritage. Historical events, social movements, and collective experiences create psychological imprints that influence behavior generations later. The descendants of traumatic historical events, war, genocide, oppression, displacement, often carry the emotional residue of these experiences even when they have no direct memory of them. This inheritance manifests as unexplained anxieties, behavioral patterns, and worldview assumptions that seem to have no personal origin. Understanding this collective dimension of psychological experience helps explain patterns that cannot be traced to individual history alone. It also reveals the responsibility that comes with being part of a cultural lineage, the opportunity to transform collective patterns through individual healing work. When you heal trauma that has been carried through generations, you contribute to the healing of your entire lineage. When you develop consciousness about cultural patterns, you create possibilities for future generations to inherit wisdom rather than wounds. The 82nd truth explores the relationship between psychological development and the capacity for presence. Presence is not simply being physically located in a particular place, but bringing your full attention, awareness, and authentic self to whatever is happening in this moment. Most people live in psychological time travel, dwelling in past regrets or future anxieties, while missing the aliveness that exists only in present moment awareness. This mental absence from current experience creates a sense of disconnection and superficiality that pervades relationships, work, and creative endeavors. True presence requires releasing the compulsive need to be elsewhere, to be thinking about something else, to be preparing for what comes next. It demands the courage to fully engage with what is actually happening rather than escaping into mental commentary or emotional reactivity. This quality of presence cannot be achieved through effort, but emerges naturally when psychological obstacles are removed. As you heal old wounds, integrate shadow material, and develop emotional regulation skills, your natural capacity for presence begins to shine through the clouds of psychological conditioning. The 83rd psychological truth addresses the nature of psychological projection in intimate relationships, where unconscious patterns play out with particular intensity and complexity. In close relationships, you tend to attract and be attracted to people who carry aspects of your own disowned psyche, creating opportunities for both profound growth and significant challenge.